So this was a presentation I recently gave for Oil Painters of America, and I got so many emails and responses from this presentation about how valuable it was to them. And so I wanted to, oh, I wonder why this is not letting me. Oh, there it is. Okay, I wanted to do this again for my own audience, for my own followers, and again for my Art Life School members who are interested in hearing this information again, or just building. Repetition is the mother of skill. All right, so I'm going to be sure to see some of you guys though. So let me see if I can open this up. You can certainly be on camera if you want, and at the end we'll unmute for questions and things like that. Okay, so today's topic is still life arrangements made easier. Okay, because even for me, after all I've learned over the last 17 years, this can still sometimes trip me up, which is why I created for myself way back when I started creating like this cheat sheet based on, things that I was studying and researching and learning by trial and error and by analyzing and researching master paintings. So you want to be sure to take notes today or take screenshots. I think taking notes is the best because that helps just to kind of cement anything that you're learning. And at the end of this webinar, a good exercise to do for yourself is just to summarize what you learned in writing for yourself. This is such a great way to be a student. It will just help further kind of lock in any of the information. So I invite you to consider to be totally present during this presentation. Don't be multitasking, distracted, all the things. Really focus, really concentrate and pay attention, and you will absorb more of this information that then you can go and apply to your own art. Okay, so I'm going to be going over a very, very simple 3-step process to setting up a winning still life. For those of you who may not know me or you're very, very new to me, I am the founder of the Art Life School. I've been a professional artist for, gosh, I don't know how long. Let's not give my age away, but I've been painting for 17 years and professional full-time artist and teaching for, that means 13 years. And I've been running the Art Life School online for well over 5 years. So that's me. I really, cut my teeth, so to speak, on still life painting. And I also love landscape and all kinds of other genres, but I really built my skill set with still life painting first. Okay. So have you ever felt like this person? It sounds like some of you do. Have you ever tried to set up a still life only to have it wind up looking like a mixed up yard sale? If you're in the Northeast, tag sale. I don't know where it's called a garage sale. I know we called it that in Oklahoma and Texas. But anyways, have you ever sought to set up a still life and have it kind of just look like this hodgepodge, mess? Sometimes whenever that happens, here's some of the things that we can begin to resort to, right? Copying somebody else's composition to a T because we don't know how to set up our own. Maybe even painting the same setup over and over and over again because you know that that setup works, or perhaps even just painting a single object still life, which nothing wrong with that. There's some very beautiful single object still lifes, but there's so much more available to you, or maybe just a simple bouquet of flowers. These are things that you can kind of fall back on as sort of crutches if you haven't built your skill set with setting up a still life composition. Or spending endless hours researching how to do it or looking at other paintings, but not really understanding what makes them work. And of course, the worst outcome of all is just getting frustrated, getting stuck in our head, and not painting at all. That is the absolute worst outcome that any of us can fall prey to. So this is your chance to vent. If you haven't already put in the chat, let me know what is your biggest challenge, your biggest frustration when it comes to setting up a still life. And that will also become part of our Q&A. So vent away, rant in the chat. What do you hate about setting up a still life? What do you find challenging? All right, so This is going to be a very, very simple 3-step process that I'm going to cover here with you today. You can use this as like a cheat sheet for yourself next time that you go to set up a still life. No, of course, this does not cover every little nuance there is to composition because, as we know, with all things art related, there's the fundamentals. And then, of course, there's so many layers and so much nuance. But these are the really 3 big pillars, I would say. So in this session, I'm going to be covering the 3 basic ingredients, 1, 2, 3, ABC, needed to set up a successful still life. And I'm going to include some bonus tips at the end to kind of go into a few of those nuances without us getting overwhelmed and TMI and getting lost in the weeds, because that is the number 1 way that you will stop yourself and sabotage yourself as an artist and student is to feel overwhelmed, okay? So you got to start with those baby steps and build from there. And we're going to have some time to answer questions at the end. So you're going to want to stick around to the end. We will be here till the end of the hour together. I have a special offer for those of you and also a potential free gift for some of you at the end of the webinar. So you'll want to stick around. All right. Does all of this sound good to you? Thumbs up, everybody. Okay, cool, great. If not, you know where the exit door is. All right, so these are the 3 steps that we're going to cover, okay? Number 1 is choose your perspective. Oh, I'm not sure, somebody maybe is on an iPad or something. I don't know how this happens on Zoom where people start writing on the presentation somehow. It is so bizarre. Do y'all see this yellow line or do I just see it? Okay. Okay, I'm not sure why that happens, but be careful if you're on a tablet or an iPad. I think that's where that comes from, and I don't know how it happens. Okay, 3 steps. Number 1, we're going to be talking about perspective in still life. That's the number 1 thing to think about and often gets overlooked. Number 2, choose your, what I call linear design. You can call this your composition, essentially, and we're going to go over that. Number 3 is your value structure. So these are the 3 most important key ingredients, okay? And we're going to break down each of these into further detail for you. Okay, here are visual examples of the perspective options. You have 3 choices with your perspective. Okay, number 1 is an eye level perspective. Let me get my laser pointer here. That's probably better than the mouse. Okay, eye level perspective. This is where, and I'm using landscape because most of us understand perspective better when it comes to landscape. At least I feel like I did. So I'm using landscape as a correlation or analogy to help you guys understand this better. Here we have simple 2-point perspective. This is what we think of when we think of perspective, right? Somebody says perspective, we start thinking about this, boxes going off into space. Okay, so the first option you have with still life and landscape is eye level. This is where the painting is not so much about depth of space. It's more about, it's less depth, it's shallow depth, and it's more about movement either up and down or across the picture plane. It could be left to right, right to left. Again, it could be vertical, up and down. This is a beautiful landscape painting by the great Edgar Payne that illustrates the eye level perspective. Okay, and I've got the other ones up here that you can compare to. So you would set up a still life very similar to how you would, you know, choose a composition for landscape whenever you're doing eye level. Okay, choice number 2 is looking down at an angle. You know, roughly this is probably, I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but looking down at like a 45-degree angle or something. You're looking down into space. This composition is all about this depth of space, as you can see here in this beautiful Arthur Street and landscape. It's all about leading the eye from front to back, and sometimes even back to front. In landscape, it's definitely front to back. The third option is bird's eye view. This is not a painting, this is just a graphic. because a lot of historical painters would have never painted something in bird's eye view. Number one, because that they never experienced the world that way. Pre-airplanes, the only time you really see this kind of viewpoint is if you are a bird or in a plane, and you're looking out the window on the plane and everything just looks like a series of flat shapes. Even a mountain does not look tall. Everything just looks flat, right? So this is bird's eye view and what ends up happening with bird's eye view compositions. And we'll go into more details here, but a lot of bird's eye view is really about pattern and repetition when it comes to bird's eye view, because we're not dealing with any depth of space at all, or very, very little. Okay, so those are your three perspectives. And I think it's the most important because it's the one that will really dictate your composition the most. Okay, so let's go through eye level perspective. Here are some still life examples of my own that are in eye level perspective. The movement is, if it's a vertical, it tends to be up and down. If it's a horizontal, it tends to be left to right or right to left, or, left to right in a little kind of zigzaggy up and down. But it's movement across the picture rather than movement into the picture plane. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so there is a very little tabletop plane, sometimes only a little sliver. And the tiniest sliver of the tabletop plane there is, that means that composition is really at even with your eye level. So your horizon line, like in landscape, your horizon line, in still life, the horizon line is the back edge of your tabletop. Okay. So the more at eye level it is, the less of the tabletop you're going to see in a still life. All right. This has a very bold, graphic, kind of grab you quality to it, much more than the depth still life. Okay. All right. So the other thing is, usually with eye level, you have a lot more above the horizon line space, less space below the horizon line. Okay. Below the table edge. Horizon lines are table edge. Okay. So sometimes in eye level, you do have things coming over the table edge, which is going to give you a little extra depth. And so in that case, it raises up in the picture plane a little bit, but still the ratio is, and even in this case, it's 70% above the horizon line, 30% below. So it's just a good rule of thumb to stick with whenever you're doing eye level. So there's more room to breathe above the horizon line, above the objects rather than below. And if we go back to Payne's image here, you can definitely see that. Look how low his horizon line is set. And so in this case, it's like 80-20, right? 80% of the picture is above the horizon line, 20% below. The more you contrast and expand this ratio, the more of a graphic, bold punch it's going to have. Okay. Contrast is king when it comes to design and painting. So just remember that. You don't want to be falling somewhere in the middle. Okay, so you don't want like half and half, basically. So qualities of a looking down perspective in still life, and I've got Arthur Streeton's landscape here to illustrate. Again, this is really about movement back into space. So in this case, really what we just did in eye level gets flipped and reversed. We have more empty space at the front of the composition, and the objects are more towards the back center of the painting, the star of the show, your subject matter, your focal point, whatever you call it. I call it the star of the show, is at the back plane of the picture. And again, the ratio is not ratio, but like there's more empty space now on the tabletop plane. You do not ever put in a shelf edge whenever you're doing a looking down angle still life. There's no point. There's no point in putting it in. Okay. So now you can put in, like, if you want to have like the actual table in the painting or something like that, obviously you can paint in like part of the scene is the table. Kathy Michaels and the Art Life School just had a beautiful piece like that, where she had a bowl of fruit sitting on a table and she was showing where the table ends and then the background. So you can definitely do that. But like, I wouldn't put in a table edge here on a painting like this because it just wouldn't serve anything. It wouldn't add anything to the picture. So your focal points at the back, that tends to be either back slightly right of center, left of center, or yes, you can have something right in the center. Oh my God, it's a miracle. You can even put something in the center if you want to. Okay, qualities of bird's eye view perspective still life. And I've got another, that image up here again to illustrate this. This is really, again, just about least amount of depth of space. You have no back wall, right? There is really no horizon line because horizon lines only happen when you have two planes of space that you're looking at. So in this case, you're just looking at one plane of space. You're looking directly down like a bird would be looking flying over, you know, a landscape. And so really you're just seeing tabletop in this case. So these still lifes here, you still are going to be seeing have two planes of space. You still have the back wall in those compositions. Now, these still lifes tend to be all about how do you move the eye flatly, like around the picture. Color seems to be a big useful tool when it comes to these bird's eye still lifes. So this piece here is, okay, this one's by Sarah Sedgwick. These two female artists do a lot of these perspectives in their paintings. So Carol Marine here, and then Sarah Sedgwick here. And then this is a looking down eye level lesson that we had in art life school. So you can see it really becomes about these patterns and these repetitions of shapes and just how the shapes are arranged on the canvas. All right. So again, it's not about depth of space. So that's your third perspective option. This I would say is the most recent, most contemporary, I guess, invention, you might say, with composition, because it didn't exist prior to photography, prior to airplanes, right? Prior to a lot of advertisements becoming popular, right? So even in like historical art museums, you're not really ever going to see a still life that's painted like this prior to the 21st century, really. So something to think about. Okay, so this is step 2. So that goes over the perspectives. Now we're moving on to step 2. Once you know which perspective you choose to do or you want to do, and all of them work and all of them are good, so just pick one and go with it. And then step 2 is you're going to pick your linear design, okay? Again, for me, I found more information out in the world back in my days of being a student at art college with landscape. It just seemed like there was so much more available on composition when it came to landscape and so little when it came to still life. So I really pulled a lot of my learning from studying landscape and then applying it to still life. So this is a really great book. If you don't have it, I would highly recommend that you pick it up. Edgar Payne's Composition of Outdoor Painting. Obviously, his book is not the only book that would have this kind of information in it. This used to be the kind of things that got passed down, right? From the schools to the teachers prior to modernism, modern art. This information was very common knowledge. It was fundamental. It was just always taught, right? So unfortunately, whenever modernism came in and kind of destroyed representational art, we lost a lot of this, knowledge, this legacy along the way. So luckily, some of these really older books are still available out there. And of course, now with so many representational art coming back, so many modern artists, like contemporary artists like myself, are putting information out there anew as well and teaching. So it's getting built back up. But this used to not be something that you would have to go and hunt and peck and just search for forever to find it. Okay, so here are the ones that I most often use that I think are the simplest and the easiest to apply. Obviously, there's more to choose from, like he's got radiating lines on here, which is a nice one. That's one I use too. But these are the letters and shapes that I would recommend the most, especially if you are just getting started setting up your own still lifes. Let's start with the shapes first, because I think they are even simpler and easier. Circle. Okay, a circle shape, setting up a still life to read in a circular motion, right? These two shapes here are fantastic because they hold the viewer's attention in the painting longer just by nature of the composition. So setting up your objects, so if you have a bouquet of roses like this, I would turn this rose down facing towards the next rose. This rose is facing back up towards the next leaf, and the circle continues, right? The next shape is triangle. This is the triangle shape we all think of right away when we hear the word triangle, like pyramid. However, you can also use a triangle really any direction. This composition, I'm using the vertical axis of the pewter pitcher, and I'm using the cast shadow of the pitcher on the back wall to create this triangular composition. So sometimes with still life, the big hang up is that you are thinking about objects too much. You're thinking about the objects. What am I going to paint? What's inspiring? Okay. What kind of colors do I want to paint today? What you want to think more about is your composition, okay? More than the objects. Not to say that the objects are not important, but I think starting with the composition is best, and then you fit the objects into that chosen composition, okay? An arch, a rainbow or an arch is another really wonderful shape. Okay, so you can set up a composition that's kind of in a rainbow arch type of thing here. Okay, that's a beautiful shape to use as well. Okay, other very simple shapes are, let's look at T and L because they're very closely related. T and L, or cross and L, as pictured here in Edgar Payne's demonstrations here for landscape. So this picture here is a T shape composition, okay, where you have, a vertical axis. One element is creating the vertical axis. The other elements are creating the horizontal axis, okay? This one is more of an L shape where you have, it's a backwards L. And so I'm just starting with that very simple framework. Those are shapes and letters that I know always work every single time. It's a miracle. All right. S curves, right? Or you could think of S curves, even if you like angles better and curves less, you could think of a Z shape or zigzags, right? So I'm a very curvy kind of loving gal, so I respond more to letters like C and S. So if you're going for an S curve, and an S is naturally vertical, right? So that kind of tells me I'm going to be doing a vertical composition, thinking about an S. And the idea is to move the eye in that direction of this S curve. So if I'm setting up a bouquet of roses like this, that's what I'm thinking about, how high or how low I cut a rose, where do I place a leaf, how is this rose going to lead into the highlight on the vase, so on and so forth. That's what I'm thinking about, is that S curve shape. That's a really beautiful. C shape is really just a less completed circle, okay? And you could do a backward C as well. So don't get too hung up on, the literal letters. You can do them upside down, you can do them backwards, so on and so forth. Okay, step 3, this is critical because most of us love color, and I am such a lover of color as well. But, I'm sure everybody's heard that cliche. Have you heard that cliche that says, value does all the work, color gets all the attention? Okay, it is so true. So here again, your value structure, this is really important. Your value structure is so critical to the success of your painting. And 9 times out of 10, the weakest part of somebody's painting is that everything has just come to the middle. you could even say that maybe about composition. It's like things are just collected in the middle of the painting. You know, there's no composition, but values especially. So remember that contrast is king in painting. So you want to build in value contrast in your painting. Here are 3 very simple value structures that I would recommend you choosing, right? So pick one of these. So again, this is like a cheat sheet recipe book for creating a still life composition. So you pick your perspective, then you pick your linear composition, then you pick your value structure. And your 3 choices for value structure are as follows: light against dark. Okay, that's this painting up here. Your foreground, your still life subject is light against dark. And you want to, again, really, try to get maximum impact. You're going to really push those extremes. And you also don't want equal ratio, 50-50. No, no, no. This is not a fair fight in still life. It is not 50-50. You want one ratio to be much greater over the 50% line, okay, than the other. Does that make sense? The next option is dark against light. So this beautiful, beautiful piece by Fantin Latour, the famous French artist of so many magnificent still lifes and florals. If you don't know his work, go look it up because they are all incredible. This is a really great example of dark against light. And if you turn this into black and white, you take these photos, you turn them into black and white, you're going to see how extreme the value contrast is between the foreground and the background. And in still life, that is what you're always thinking about: foreground versus background. Okay, so when you're doing light against dark, I'm talking about lighter foreground against darker background. Dark against light, darker objects against lighter background. It doesn't mean that there's no color. Every color has a value. So first you want to think about value. Dark red is a darker value. Orange, yellow, white, light green, those are lighter value colors. Okay, your third choice. So the top 2 have the most dramatic punch and impact. The third one is going to be a little more kind of harmonious feeling, maybe a little more calm feeling. And so again, the value structure you choose contributes to the mood and kind of emotional vibe, you might say, of your painting. So dark and light against middle tone value. So that would be this rose piece of mine on the far right here, where you have dark and light values against a middle tone background. I do find that middle tone backgrounds are really benefit from using a strong color design as well. So that might be just something to consider. In these cases with really strong value contrast, you don't have to rely so much on color to bring in the excitement in the piece. It's more about value contrast that brings in the excitement. Anytime your values start getting a little bit more evened out, you have to rely on color more, okay? And it can be a simple color, scheme like in this case, pink and green. All right, these 2 examples on the far left are examples of more same against same. And it's not to say that you cannot do that, okay? But it is so much harder. Doing same against same or light against light, dark against dark is much more challenging, so I would not recommend that you try something like that right out of the gate. I mean, you can challenge yourself, see what you can do with it. And what I will say is that for me to be able to paint these now, 17 years later, is because I have built a deep understanding about still life and painting in general, right? So things like this now are easier for me and I can pull them off, but you can't rely on value contrast as much anymore in these kind of compositions. Does that make sense? So in these kind of compositions, you are relying more on edges, really a lot more on edges, and a lot more on paint quality, And this one, you know, a little bit more on color with the color on the bittersweet and the pear. So just food for thought if you're like, oh, why do I have to have value contrast? It's much easier if you have value contrast in your painting. Okay, we'll go through some bonus tips here. These are just some general fundamental tips that you can, once you follow that cheat sheet formula, that you can then go through here. If something is still feeling a little bit off with your still life, these are things that you can kind of go through and ask yourself about. So you want to think in threes. Threes is like, you know, the Holy Trinity, right? Even cooking thinks in threes. It's like, so three objects to start with. If you want to start building away from just doing one singular object. You want to star of the show object and then two supportive cast objects, okay? So your star of the show object needs to be, usually it's a thing that's most different. Again, once you understand these principles, then guess what? You get to break these principles and see if you can make them work. So it's that old cliche of like, you got to know the rules and know how to utilize the rules first, then in art you can break them. All of it can be broken because contrast is really the only thing that kind of overrides everything, right? So three sizes of objects. If you followed the cheat sheet and you're like, ah, this composition still kind of sucks. Do you have three different sizes in your still life, or are they all too similar in size? Okay, so going for a larger object, a medium size, a small object, get variety in your sizes. Okay. Three colors. If it's feeling flat or feeling bland, you know, do you need maybe more color? Color is probably the easiest way to add more variety and excitement, and also can be the most challenging because, you know, color, to balance color is also a skill set that takes, you know, quite some time to develop and understand. But what you can do to make it easier in the beginning is using your color wheel. And I would say either just starting with a triad or starting with a split complementary color scheme. So instead of just doing blue and orange, you might do blue and yellow orange and red orange. Okay, that's a split complementary color scheme. This composition here is more of purple, orange, and, you know, green, right? So this painting down here is more complementary color with the blue and orange. So I'm not, you know, I didn't want to spend a ton of time on color because a lot of time gets spent on color. And I feel like you want to master the first three things first and then start implementing more color, understanding of color into your work. But you can, and also you don't have to do a color scheme. I'll just say that too. You really don't. You don't have to do a color scheme. Just make sure that the colors feel like they, you know, do belong together, right? So you maybe are not going to do this kind of basic stuff, but you're maybe not going to do a magenta with an earth red, for example. Like that would just clash, right? So you just want to use common sense if you're choosing to add, you know, a few colors to your still life. Okay, three values: dark, middle, light. So even though you're choosing like light against dark or dark against light, you still at the end of the day want to have at least three values. Okay, and I would say probably no more than 5 values. The more values you get in your paintings, oh my gosh, the more those paintings are just going to fall flat and fall apart. So 3 values minimum overall. So you might have a couple of shades of dark or a couple of shades of light, for example. So light against dark doesn't mean, oh, I have to use the same value of light all throughout the picture, right? So you might have an orange or a yellow orange that, like here, that's functioning as a light, or even a pale yellow green that's functioning as light, and a white that's functioning as light. All 3 of those are not the same value, but they all do read as light against dark of the background, okay? And any of your darks in a light against dark of the background tie more together with your dark background. So they become more of like kind of tied and connected to that mystery of shadow, the mystery of background. Okay, so make sure you do have, at least 3 values. And remember that contrast is king. So whatever your star of the show is, that's where you're going to be utilizing like your most contrast. Okay. Most contrast, in edges, detail, value contrast, color contrast, all the contrasts available to you as an artist. And that's really all we have to work with, right? In still life painting. We have value, we have color, we have paint quality and edges, right? And then we have, if we want to really get into it, detail versus not detailed when it comes to contrast. Okay, so I wanted to talk about lighting your still life and how to set up your still life in your space. And it's really a good idea to have something always set up. Always have this ready to go. Please, 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 if you are serious about strengthening your creative practice, do not have all of your art stuff tucked away in a closet, or you got to go through all these steps, to get all your stuff out. You want to have it there set up. And anything that, even like a painting you're working on the easel, make sure those things are out and available for you to view. Okay, but here are some technical tips on lighting and still life setup, in the studio, because one thing I've learned myself as a student and also teaching so many artists is that the lighting situation can really screw up a painting real fast. If you don't have a good lighting setup, this can just totally destroy everything we just went over, okay? So make sure, double check that you do not have too many light sources in your studio. So if you have 3 highlights on your fruit, Houston, we have a problem, because you cannot create form and you cannot get good light and shadow. You're going to lose your shadows. You're going to, everything's going to go into the middle, which I think a lot of times is why people's paintings end up all in the middle tone, just because they're not just using a simple spotlight or a simple singular window to light their still life. Okay, angle your light so that 2/3 is in light and 1/3 is in shadow to maximize form. It is much harder to create form in backlight. Again, once you are reaching more masterful levels, you know how to do it and you can do it, but it's hard as hell to do it, okay? To create form in backlight or when most of the form is in shadow. So you want more of the form in light, less in shadow. And that's a pretty good ratio there, 2/3 and 1/3. If you are not seeing a shadow shape on your fruit, for example, or on a bowl, like how you see here in the still life setup, you know you have a lighting problem. If you cannot see the shadow shapes clearly, you have a lighting problem and you need to fix it. All right. So you don't want to paint with too strong of light on your canvas. I really don't care how strong the light goes on my still life. I actually enjoy that burnout effect of the light. But what I don't want to do is have too much light on my still life. Okay, because has anybody done plein air painting and you paint out in the full sun and you're like, this painting looks great. And then you get it back in the house and it looks black, like everything is too dark. You thought you were painting this nice, light, bright grass, which is why plein air painters say, paint under an umbrella or paint in overcast light or in the shade. The reason why is you want to paint with more diffused light. But most of us are not in a situation where we have diffused Northlight studios. I certainly still don't have a diffused Northlight studio to this day. So most of us with still life have to rely on these spotlights. You just want to make sure you're not putting a light directly above, or getting your panel too close. to your spotlight. Otherwise, your painting is going to come out way too dark. Okay. Another tip is with lighting is have the same temperature of light source hitting your still life, your palette, and your painting all at the same time if you can. So I paint close enough to my still lifes so that I can use the same light that's angled towards my still life is also hitting my palette and my painting. So I'm not dealing with different light sources. You definitely want to avoid different temperatures. So you don't want to have like a warm light somewhere on in your room and then you're painting by a cool light. Okay, so that's another thing just to double check, something that can be easily overlooked. Again, you know you have a problem with light if you're seeing too many multiple highlights and you're not seeing a strong enough shadow. That means you need to fix your studio situation, okay? To get more variety in your eye levels, you can do a number of different things. Back in the day, you can see here my still lifes, I would just use like boxes and shelves, and I would take the legs off of tables like this, and I would just stack it up and raise it up, or lower it down. Take things like this out and lower it down. Lower. I also used to just have two different tables, one that was set lower for tabletop still life and one that was more at eye level. Since then, I have discovered that it's really nice to have a table that cranks up and down or is adjustable up and down without having to do too much manual work. So you can either get yourself a sculpture stand, which is what I now have, and it has a hand crank and it's super easy. This is a more expensive option. Okay, so if you don't have $300 to spend, you're probably not going to do a sculpture stand. The other thing you can do, this is what I do for my teaching studios, and that is I get a speaker stand for music speakers, and then I attach a piece of wood to the top of them. And the speaker stands come with the attachments that you can screw in to the wood. And that doesn't have a hand crank, but you can raise it up and down. So that makes it super easy to raise and lower to any eye level that you need it to be. The other thing to help control your shadows and too much reflected ambient light in a room, especially a room that has a lot of white walls, okay, is to get these black project boards. Okay, it's like the tri-fold project board. You can get this anywhere. And you can, Michael's, Walmart, Hobby Lobby, Amazon, I'm sure, has them. And I just cut them to however tall I want them to be. Because sometimes they're super tall, like 4 feet tall or something. So you can get a simple shadow box or a tri-fold project board like this, okay? If you want my full supply list and you're not an Art Life School member, you can go and get signed up right away on Art Life with Kelly for oil painting for beginners masterclass. That's totally free, and that will give you the whole material list. Okay, so let's dive in with the time we have left to some questions. I'm going to, well, before I do that, I do want to mention, because some of you may need to go because we're about 10 minutes late, 10 minutes till the top of the hour here. And some of you may not be able to stay for all of the questions. So I do want to mention that you are invited to sign up for the Art Life School. I'm going to pop the link in the chat here in a minute, but again, you can go to artlifewithkelly.com and you will find the membership there. Okay, it is $97 a month for the Art Life School. And there is so much in there. You get new lessons every single month. Every single masterclass I've ever created, you get access to, which at this point I think is over like 14, 15 masterclasses. You get access to the art business courses that I've created that are in there. We have live workshops every month inside the Art Life School. You have an opportunity to submit for an independent painting critique every month. Also, we have a Q&A and a support call via Zoom every month in there as well. So tons of education in this monthly subscription. And I think really the most valuable part is our beautiful, amazing community of artists inside the Facebook group where you can share your work and ask questions and support each other. And sometimes even, be like, hey, I'm really struggling right now and I could use some support. So that's $97 a month. So I do want to make sure everybody gets that information on the Art Life School because we would love to have you. And if you found this hour valuable, you're definitely going to find the Art Life School valuable. So I've popped the link in there for you and you can go check out the Art Life School. All right. And I'm happy to answer questions too about the Art Life School. Okay, so going back through the chat, and I want to make sure too, everybody has permission to unmute themselves if we need to clarify anything further. And I really want to keep this focused on the information that I presented today. Okay, so that is my intention again, so that we don't get into overwhelm and get into the weeds on everything. So on those 3 steps or any of the bonus tips that I shared, I'm happy to go into details on that. Okay, so how to choose what to paint and putting it together. So I think these were some of the early struggles. Let's see if we have any specific questions, or you can raise your hand under reactions if you have a specific question that you want answered. Creating the surrounding background, how far away to stand to paint. I think we covered that. I don't stand far away from my still life. I don't think you want to be too far away because you want to be able to see details. So I would say probably no more than 10 feet away. And I typically am just probably less than 2 feet away from my still life. So the bigger the still life, the more further back you probably need to get though. Smaller still lifes, you can really be, right on top of them. Okay. Getting the lighting correct. Okay, I hope I answered those questions, Marie. Getting the lighting correct so it's easier to paint. Kathy Kepler says, I am excited. I'm having trouble with setting up with the lighting because of the small space. Okay. Yeah, so you could get maybe a smaller clamp light, Kathy, or if you have either an east light window, or if you do have a north light window, that's most ideal because it's the same consistency of light all day long. It's the most diffuse light all day long. East light is next best if you're going to use a window, because once the sun goes over the roof of your home or your room, then it's constant diffuse light. Okay. But otherwise you can get a smaller clamp light, for setup. You could use, like in our, in the workshops I've hosted, I've just bought TV trays and I've taken the legs off of TV trays and screwed those into those music stands. And those are what, like 18 inches? 18 inches. They're not very big at all. So, do with what you have in the space that you have. Be careful of these surface level excuses. And I'm going to let you keep all your excuses. And I'm sure they're all very good excuses. We all have them. But a lot of times they're really surface level, right? They're really just like, oh, I don't have that thing. I don't have time. I can't afford it. All this stuff. They're really surface level reasons. And excuses sometimes comes with a little bit of a shame aspect to it, which is definitely not my intention. But reasons to not do something is usually masking something else underneath, like I'm scared, really just scared to do this. I'm afraid it's not going to work out. I'm afraid it's just going to be a crapshoot again this time, like it was last time. So usually those surface level reasons tend to just kind of mask the unconscious reasons underneath that are the real reasons and real excuses. And most of the time, that's just fear, right? Just fear most of the time. And your higher self, try to get into a practice of asking your higher self for guidance. Your higher self is always calm. It's never fearful. It is never dramatic. It is always just going to get right to the point. Like, it's okay. You can baby step your way there. Just go and buy that thing. It'll be all right. So it's never fearful. Your higher self is never fearful. It's your inner sage wisdom that you want to tap into. Okay. Lighting, cool or warm, you can use either or, Hedda. I prefer cool light, being that, I go more traditional still life painting route, which was always traditionally cool versus warm, cool light and warm shadows. But you can definitely do a warm spotlight as well. I'm really not, a huge fan of like passing on any kind of, this is the right way and the only way. It's freaking art, like it's they're really the only right way to do it is the way that works for you. So I don't really like to get into too many particular dogmas about things like that. And what I'll say is personally for me, I enjoy painting from cool light. So again, if you're not in the art life school, if you're in the art life school, check your materials list. There are links for the bulbs that I use, which are over 5,000 Kelvin, which is what you want to look for cool bulbs. And okay, overlapping objects, what goes in front of what, how to add drapery that isn't overwhelming. Sometimes my drapery is too much. Yeah, I've been going down to the Art Students League every week on Thursday to study with Greg Kreutz. And it's so fascinating to me how many people are just painting all this wild drapery in the back. And like all these folds everywhere. And I'm like, no, don't do that. So in the background, that's a great question, Sharon. Let me share my presentation again so I can show some illustrations of this. In the background, I would say, don't use drapery unless you're using it intentionally. Okay, so let me find one. Unless you're using it intentionally. Okay. I thought it was going to take me right to that slide. I guess not. You don't have to worry so much about drapery in the foreground because you want it to stand out more. But again, you need to design it, right? You need to design the folds to fit into your composition. You think about the value of the drapery. Is it bringing in light or is it bringing in color? And then if you're going to use drapery in a background, make sure that it's intentional. So again, you want to design it. I use clips and thumbtacks and, I play with the folds until I get the folds pointing the eye to where I want it to point to. So in this case, this drapery is bringing in pattern and color. So it's, I'm choosing it intentionally for that. The drapery itself actually is kind of tying and unifying all the colors together. All the same colors that are in the still life are showing up in the drapery piece. The directional aspect of it is, where does this fold end? I would say the last fold is probably the most important if you're going to utilize drapery in the background. So the last fold, what does it lead to? So in this case, it's this curving us back around into the objects. And I think that might be the only one I have with the background drapery. Foreground drapery, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm just missing a light in the picture. I need a light value. So another good rule of thumb is make sure you have a light and a dark and a color and a gray in your still life. That's something I didn't cover on tips. A light and a dark, a color and a gray in the whole still life. Otherwise, like if I had this still life and I didn't have a light neutral, like this white cloth, it would feel like something was missing, almost like it's too colorful because the background's colorful and all the subject is colorful, right? And so sometimes our still lifes can also just get too much color, right? So you need a dark and a light and a gray to balance all that color. Again, this drapery was used intentionally. It doesn't even have to make sense really why it's there. Sometimes I think we think a little too literally, like, well, why would that cloth be there? And it's like, it's there because it completes the composition and it makes the painting beautiful. So sometimes I think with still life, we kind of get hung up on, does that make sense that all these objects are together? Do they go together? Are they telling a narrative, or is there some kind of theme happening? And you don't have to think in that way. So this drapery is just utilized, adding in that light value. Otherwise, without it, there's not a big enough light giver in the painting is what I call it. And it's also completing that triangle shape, right? of the design, and it's leading our eye. This is leading our eye the angle of the cast shadow, much like a drapery piece would. Cast shadow angle is leading us to the final orange at the end of the triangle, but so is the white cloth. Does that make sense? So I hope that's helpful. And if you set up a still life that, you know, just has like, you're just got like a basic green, like when I painted this week in Greg's class, he had like a big bulky drapery. I tend to cut mine down so that I don't have that problem. Like he was just kind of using like a big sheet and it's all like bunched up in the background. And so all the students are just copying all these folds in the background, totally destroying their paintings and compositions because we don't care about some sheet folds in the background of a still life. So you want your background to recede and your subject matter, your still life objects to come forward. Oh, did y'all not see the examples? Oh, maybe that's an old message. Okay. Oh, thank you, Lisa, for telling me. Probably, she says, probably a permission to turn off in Zoom. Oh, okay, I'll ask my assistant about that. She might be able to help me set that up. She's talking about the pencil marks on from the iPads. I'll ask her about that. Yeah, I bet it is a permission we can control in Zoom. Okay. Any more questions? I'm scrolling through. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon says, awesome book. Okay. Yeah, it's funny, Lisa. Actually, I double checked before the call and my background is not set on to be blurry. So I don't know why it's doing that. Like I even checked that. Like I've never turned on blur on my Zoom call. So I don't know how that's doing that. Again, I'll have to see if my assistant can correct that technical issue. Okay, so we are going to send out a recording for this, just so everybody knows if you came in late. You do have to be on the email list to get that, so make sure that you're on there. Let's see, I get hung up on background color. It seems that complementary color, the complementary color to the focal point doesn't look like a color someone would want on their walls. Okay, so background color, yeah, this kind of hangs up a lot of people, myself included. Again, if you're doing light against dark, you know that the value is going to be dark. If we are thinking in terms of always foreground versus background, whatever objects you have in your foreground, you know you want your background to be somewhat opposite of that. So again, if you are wanting like a bright orange or a bright piece of fruit or a bright flower, like a colorful flower, to stand out more in your foreground, you don't want to go for too much color in your background. Okay, so you want to think in terms of contrast when you're choosing your background color. Again, going back to light, dark, gray, and color, if you have a bunch of light and color in your foreground, which you probably should have, because those are the two dominant things that the human eye is attracted to, okay, then you're probably going to have more dark and desaturated grayer colors in the background. When you're doing complementary color schemes, you want to make sure that whatever complementary color you utilize in the background is subdued enough to recede from the foreground color. So if you're doing blue and orange, it's most likely best for you to do a bluer background. Could be a deep blue, deep dark blue, could be a blue gray, and then your bright, vivid, pure orange in the foreground. That's going to be the easiest if you're doing complementary color. Same thing with like pink and green, right? So like that pink and green roses painting that I showed you, I'm not going to do lime green in the background, you know, because the soft pink of the rose is just going to be killed by a lime green background. So you never want anyone to look more at your backgrounds than they are looking at the foreground. Does that make sense? Okay. You don't want somebody going, wow, what a great background color. That's great. It's like, okay, then you totally, you missed it in still life if you're doing that. Okay. And as I say, all of these rules I'm mentioning, pretty much every single rule I've mentioned, I've also broken. successfully somehow. So I did a lime green background once, just to give you an example. But I had to use, in the foreground, it was like cherry blossoms, but I had to make the cherry blossoms like a magenta, like a hot pink. So the lime green background was still somewhat subdued in contrast to the foreground subject, the magenta, the hot pink color. Okay, so I had to make the foreground color more intense, more saturated, more grab you than the background color. Okay, so you can break all of these rules, but first is to understand why they work, why they're important. Okay, let's see. Okay, to photograph your setup and then paint it, of course. Do what works for you, boo. Again, I am not going to tell anybody not to work from photos, okay? I will say that I see a great benefit in studying from life. So if you can have your still life set up and take a photo, obviously you're going to have some things that die. You know, if you're working with roses, things like that, they're not going to last very long. So you want to think about that. However, your eye is so much better than a camera. Okay, so I do want to point that out. Have you ever taken a photo of a sunset or a sunrise that you have witnessed? You have witnessed the sunset and you're just in awe of all the colors and how gorgeous and amazing it is. And then you take a photo and it's like, what the hell is this shit? That doesn't look anything like what I saw. And it also doesn't get the mood and the emotion that you're feeling. Because when you work, the benefit of working from life, either landscape or still life, is that all of your senses are involved. Every single one of your senses are involved. You know, your sight, your hearing, your touch. When you're painting landscape or a sunset, you're feeling the warmth of that sun hitting you. You're feeling the breeze on your skin. You're watching the clouds move. You're seeing the movement. So if you can see the movement, you're more likely to get the movement into your painting. So there are pros and cons to everything, right? So the upside of painting from life is all of that, which I value more than perfection and accuracy in my work. I value the experience of being with the subject, whether it's a model or a landscape. I value the real life interaction of it and my experience with that subject more than the finished product. So, and it's not wrong to work from a photo if you need to work from a photo, okay? But I just want to throw out like some of the pros and cons of that. The downsides of photos is that they tend to, colors get off, they tend to flatten, you don't see as much depth, especially in landscape, that can be really dangerous, you know, painting from landscape photos because so much just gets lost. But you can do it. And I would invite you to consider making sure that you're balancing it with working from life. Okay. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much, everybody. Wow, so many lovely, lovely comments. Yes, Art Life School, it's $97. It's a monthly membership. So, you know, you're not locked in to anything if you want to give it a shot and give it a try. And we will welcome you with open arms. Yay, you're welcome, everybody. Just looking to see if there's any more. I'm so glad those of you who came to the OPA one and came to this one, because sometimes I say different things as well, and definitely repetition is the mother of skill and learning. So hearing something more than once is always good. Very, very smart of you to do that. Okay, awesome. All right, just looking to see, I don't see any other questions. So if anybody does have a question, you can raise your hand and ask. Otherwise, we will say adieu to one another and much love. Let me know if you have any further questions about, you know, the Art Life School at all. Okay. Yay, you're also welcome. Go forth and conquer and paint. Happy painting, everybody. Have a great day and great weekend. Bye for now.